Before we begin, if you're enjoying these stories from law enforcement across America, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It helps us continue bringing you these real accounts from officers who've seen things they can't explain. And I'm curious, where are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments. Now, let's talk about the Mississippi River and what it takes from us. I am Marcus LeBlanc, and I have been working as a Port Authority officer in Baton Rouge, Louisiana for over 12 years. I have retrieved countless bodies from the Mississippi River. Accident victims, drowned people, those who jumped from bridges or fell from boats. The river takes people. That is the river's job. It has always been this way. But in the summer of 1989, I began to notice something that didn't sit right with me. A pattern that made me think of my Creole grandmother's old stories about the river not as superstition, but as a warning. It was a Thursday night in June, the kind of humid, oppressive Louisiana evening where the air feels like it's trying to smother you. I was on night patrol, checking the docks and the riverfront downtown. The port of Baton Rouge is the 9th largest port in the United States, and somebody has to make sure the cargo ships and barges don't get into trouble in the dark. I was driving along River Road, just past the old state capitol with its Gothic towers lit up against the night sky, when I got the call. Unit 7, we've got a possible jumper at River Mile 229 near the capitol. Female, white, maybe 30s, just standing at the water's edge. Anonymous caller says she looks like she's about to go in. I hit my lights and headed that way. River Mile 229 was right below the old state capitol, a section of riverbank that had a concrete path and some benches, popular with tourists during the day. At night, it was usually empty except for the occasional homeless person or teenager looking for somewhere to drink. When I pulled up, I saw her immediately. She was standing at the very edge of the water, barefoot, wearing a white sundress. The Mississippi current was strong there, brown water churning past, and she was staring straight down into it. I got out of my unit and approached slowly, the way you're supposed to when someone's in crisis. "Ma'am, my name is Marcus. I'm with the Port Authority. Are you okay?" She didn't respond, didn't even turn around, just kept staring down at the water. I got closer, close enough to see that her feet were already in the river, the water lapping at her ankles. "Ma'am, I need you to step back from the water. Come talk to me." Still nothing. I could see her lips moving slightly, like she was talking to herself or to someone I couldn't see. I reached out to touch her shoulder, to pull her back from the edge. The moment my hand made contact, she walked forward, just stepped right into the Mississippi River, calm as anything, like she was walking into a swimming pool. No hesitation, no struggle. The current took her immediately, pulled her under, and she was gone. I called it in, stripped off my duty belt, and went in after her. The water was warm and muddy, the current stronger than it looked from shore. I'm a good swimmer, grew up on this river, but the Mississippi doesn't care how good you are. It pulls you where it wants to go. I dove under, searching blind in the murky water. Louisiana rivers aren't like clear mountain streams. You can't see more than a foot in front of your face. I felt around desperately, hoping to catch her dress, her hair, anything. Nothing. She was just gone. I surfaced, gasping, and let the current carry me downstream while I tried to spot her. The water felt wrong somehow, colder than it should be, and I could swear I heard voices under the surface. Not screaming, not calling for help, singing, low and mournful like a church choir made of water. Backup arrived within minutes. We searched for 3 hours with spotlights and divers, but we never found the body. The river had taken her completely. That should have been the end of it. Tragic, but not unusual. People jump into the Mississippi all the time, and sometimes the river doesn't give them back. The current carries them miles downstream, or they get caught in the undertow, or they sink into the mud and silt at the bottom. But then it happened again. 2 weeks later, same location. A man this time, early 50s, walked right into the water at River Mile 229, right below the old state capitol. A tourist saw it happen and called it in, but by the time we got there, he was gone. Same as the woman. No struggle, no cry for help, just walked in and disappeared. I was starting to feel uneasy, but my supervisor, Captain DeVille, chalked it up to coincidence. "It's a known suicide spot," he said. "People pick the same places. Something about the location calls to them. Maybe he was right." But I couldn't shake the image of that woman's lips moving, like she was having a conversation with the river itself. 3 weeks later, it happened again, then again, then again. By the end of August, we'd had 7 people walk into the Mississippi River at the exact same spot. 7 people, different ages, different races, different backgrounds. But every single one of them did the same thing. Stood at the water's edge, stared down into the current, moved their lips like they were talking to someone, and then walked in without a backwards glance. We never recovered a single body. I started keeping a file. I know I wasn't supposed to. These cases belonged to the police department and the coroner, but something about it bothered me enough that I needed to track it myself. All 7 victims had lived in Baton Rouge. All 7 had no history of mental illness or suicidal ideation according to their families. All 7 happened at night between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. And all 7 happened at River Mile 229, within a 100-foot radius of the same spot. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern. I decided to talk to my grandmother about it. Cecile LeBlanc was 84 years old and still sharp as a tack. She lived in a small house in the old Creole neighborhood, surrounded by photographs and religious icons and bundles of herbs that she swore could cure anything from headaches to heartbreak. She was on her porch when I pulled up, rocking slowly in her chair, drinking community coffee from a chipped mug. She knew I was coming before I knocked. She always did. "Cher," she said in her thick Creole accent. "You look troubled. Come sit." I sat down on the steps and told her everything. The pattern, the location, the way the victims walked into the water like they were answering a call. She listened without interrupting, her dark eyes fixed on the street, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "To say," she finally said, "the river has always been hungry. Since before our people came to this place, since before the white men, since before even the Homa and the Chitimaca, the river takes what it wants. Grandmère, I'm not talking about folklore. I'm talking about real people dying. So am I." She set down her coffee and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear. My grandmother, who had lived through poverty and segregation and the loss of her husband, was afraid. "There is a place in the river," she said slowly, "where the water remembers. Where the dead stay dead but not gone. Your grand-père Émile, he knew about it. He tried to tell people, but nobody listened. And then one night in 1955, he went down to that same spot you're talking about and he never came back." I knew the story, of course. My grandfather had disappeared when my father was just a boy. Officially, it was ruled an accidental drowning. He'd been fishing, the police said, and must have fallen in. But I'd never heard this version before. "What do you mean? The water remembers." "You know the battle, Cher. 1862. The war between the states. Right here in Baton Rouge, thousands of men died. Many of them drowned in the river, weighed down by their uniforms and their guns, trying to cross in the middle of a fight. The water took them. The water kept them. I'd learned about the Battle of Baton Rouge in school, but it was just history, a footnote in the larger story of the Civil War. I'd never thought much about the soldiers who died in the river. You're saying the victims are connected to the battle? That's over 100 years ago. Blood calls to blood, Marcus. You of all people should understand that. I didn't like the way she said it. What does that mean? She reached out and took my hand in both of hers. Her skin was papery thin, but her grip was strong. Your ancestor, Pierre LeBlanc, he fought in that battle. He was one of the ones who drowned. The river took him on August 5th, 1862, and every generation since the river has tried to take one of us. It took your grand-père. Now it's calling you. I pulled my hand away. That's not possible. You're telling me the Mississippi River is holding a grudge from the Civil War? I'm telling you the river doesn't forget, and neither should you. I left my grandmother's house feeling more confused than when I'd arrived. I didn't believe in curses or ancestral vengeance or whatever she was trying to tell me. I was a modern law enforcement officer. I dealt in evidence and facts, but I couldn't deny the pattern. And I couldn't deny the way the water had felt that night when I went in after the woman, cold and wrong and full of voices. I decided to do some research. The Louisiana State Library had archives of local newspapers going back to the 1800s, and I spent 3 nights after my shifts going through microfilm, looking for anything about the Battle of Baton Rouge and the river drownings. What I found made my blood run cold. On August 5, 1862, Confederate forces attacked Baton Rouge in an attempt to recapture the city from Union control. The battle was chaotic, fought in the streets and along the riverfront. Union gunboats on the Mississippi provided artillery support, but many soldiers on both sides ended up in the water, either from falling off the docks or trying to swim to safety. The newspaper accounts from the weeks after the battle mentioned bodies washing up downriver for days. But what caught my attention was a small article from September 1862 buried in the back pages. Local fishermen report strange occurrences on river. Several fishermen working near the old Capitol building report hearing voices and seeing figures in the water at night. One fisherman, who wished to remain anonymous, claims to have seen men in military uniforms walking along the riverbed, visible through the clear morning water. Authorities attribute these sightings to grief and trauma from the recent battle. I sat back from the microfilm reader, my mind racing. 1862. People were reporting the same things I'd experienced. Voices in the water, figures that shouldn't be there. I kept searching and found more. In 1884, a dock worker disappeared at River Mile 229. In 1902, a woman walked into the river at the same spot and was never found. In 1923, a teenager. In 1937, a night watchman. In 1955, my grandfather Emile. Every 20 or 30 years, going back to the battle itself, someone disappeared at that exact location. And if my grandmother was right, if there really was a pattern based on bloodlines, then I could trace a direct line from Pierre LeBlanc in 1862 to me in 1989. I was next. I tried to shake off the feeling, told myself I was being paranoid. But that night, as I was doing my patrol along the riverfront, I found myself drawn to River Mile 229. Not on purpose. I told myself I was just doing my job, checking the area. But my unit pulled over right at that spot, and before I knew it, I was standing at the water's edge, staring down into the Mississippi. The river looked different than usual. The water was calmer, almost still, reflecting the lights of the old state capitol like a dark mirror. And in that reflection, I saw them. Soldiers. Dozens of them, standing in the water, their uniforms from another century, their faces pale and waterlogged. They were looking up at me. I stumbled back from the edge, my heart pounding. When I looked again, the water was just water, brown and churning and normal. But I'd seen them. I knew I'd seen them. I got back in my unit and drove away, telling myself I was tired, that I'd been working too many night shifts, that my grandmother's stories had gotten into my head. But I knew the truth. The river was calling me, and I didn't know how much longer I could resist. The next morning, I went to the Baton Rouge Police Department and asked to see the files on the 7 victims who'd walked into the river. The detective assigned to the cases was a guy named Trent Guidry, an old-timer who'd been on the force since before I was born. "Why you interested in these?" he asked, pulling out the files. "I was first responder on 2 of them. I'm just trying to understand what happened." He gave me a look that said he didn't quite buy it, but he let me see the files anyway. I spread them out on a table and started looking for connections. Different victims, different backgrounds, different reasons to be by the river that night. But as I dug deeper into their family histories, a pattern emerged. Every single victim had ancestors who'd lived in Baton Rouge during the Civil War. Every single one of them could trace their family line back to 1862, and when I cross-referenced with the battle records, I found that all 7 victims had ancestors who'd died in the Battle of Baton Rouge. Some Union, some Confederate. But all of them had drowned in the Mississippi River. "Blood calls to blood," my grandmother had said. She was right. I showed Guidry what I'd found, but he wasn't impressed. So they all had ancestors in the Civil War. "Marcus, this is Louisiana. Everybody's got ancestors in the Civil War. That doesn't explain why they walked into the river." It's not just that they had ancestors. It's that their ancestors drowned in that specific spot. The same spot where these people are dying now. You're saying what? The river's holding a grudge? Come on, Marcus, you're a smart guy. You know that doesn't make sense. Maybe it didn't make sense, but it was the only explanation that fit. That night, I drove back to River Mile 229. I told myself I was just checking the area, making sure there were no more potential jumpers. But really, I needed to see if what I'd witnessed the night before was real. I parked and walked down to the water's edge, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The river was high that night, swollen from summer rains upriver, and the current was strong. I stood there, listening to the water, and I heard it again. Singing, low and mournful, coming from somewhere beneath the surface. A choir of the drowned, singing a song I didn't know but somehow understood. And then I saw him, my grandfather Emile, standing in the water, exactly as he'd looked in the old photographs. Young, strong, wearing the same work clothes he'd worn the night he disappeared. He was looking right at me. "Grand-père?" I whispered. He opened his mouth and water poured out. His voice, when it came, sounded like it was coming from the bottom of the river itself. "La rivière se souvient, Marcus. The river remembers, and it's not finished with us yet." He raised his hand, beckoning me to join him in the water. I felt my feet moving toward the edge, not because I wanted to, because something was pulling me, the same force that had pulled the 7 victims before me. I was going to walk into the Mississippi River just like they had, and I was never going to come back out. The water was at my ankles now, cold, impossibly cold for a summer night in Louisiana, and all around me I could see them, the drowned soldiers from 1862, standing in the river, waiting for me to join them. The river takes, my grandmother had said, and now it was taking me. I snapped back to consciousness in my unit, soaking wet, shivering despite the warm Louisiana night. I don't remember how I got out of the water. One moment I was ankle-deep in the Mississippi, surrounded by the ghosts of drowned soldiers, and the next I was behind the wheel of my patrol vehicle, water pooling on the seat beneath me. My radio was crackling with static. I checked my watch. 3:47 a.m. I'd lost almost 3 hours. I started the engine with shaking hands and drove home, my mind racing. What had just happened? Had I actually walked into the river, or was it some kind of hallucination? The water soaking my clothes was real enough. So was the mud on my boots and the smell of the Mississippi clinging to my skin. When I got to my apartment, I stripped off my wet uniform and stood under a hot shower until the water ran cold. But no amount of heat could chase away the chill I felt in my bones. The chill of the river. I couldn't go back to work the next day. I called in sick, something I never did, and spent the day in my apartment with all the lights on, trying to make sense of what was happening to me. The river was calling me. That much was clear. But why? What did it want? I thought about my grandfather Emile, about how he'd disappeared in 1955 at the same spot. My grandmother had said the river tried to take one from each generation. But if that was true, why had it taken 7 random people this summer before coming for me? What made them different? I pulled out the files I'd copied from Guidry's office and started going through them again, looking for anything I might have missed. And then I saw it. The dates. The first victim had walked into the river on June 8th, the second on June 22nd, the third on July 6th. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, another person disappeared. I counted forward. If the pattern held, the next disappearance would be August 5th. August 5th, the anniversary of the Battle of Baton Rouge. The day thousands of soldiers died in and around the Mississippi River. The river wasn't just calling random victims. It was building to something. A pattern, a ritual, leading up to the anniversary of the battle itself. And I was part of it. I needed to understand what had happened during that battle. Really understand it, not just the dry historical facts I'd learned in school. I needed to know what had made that day so important that the river would remember it for over a century. The Louisiana State University Library had a special collections room dedicated to Civil War history. I drove there that afternoon, still feeling shaky but determined to find answers. The librarian, an elderly woman with thick glasses and a name tag that said Mrs. Hebert, looked at me with concern when I asked for materials on the Battle of Baton Rouge. "Are you all right, young man? You look like you've seen a ghost." If she only knew. She brought me boxes of old documents, letters, and journals from soldiers who'd fought in the battle. I spent hours reading through them, and slowly a picture began to form. The Battle of Baton Rouge hadn't been a major engagement in the grand scheme of the Civil War, but it had been brutal. The Confederate forces had attacked at dawn, hoping to recapture the city and gain control of the Mississippi River. The fighting had been house to house, hand to hand, desperate and chaotic. But what caught my attention was a series of letters from a Union officer named Captain Thomas Brennan. In one letter to his wife, dated August 10th, 1862, 5 days after the battle, he wrote, "My dearest Mary, I must tell you of something that haunts me still. On the day of the battle, as we fought to hold the riverfront, I saw men driven into the water by artillery fire and enemy charges. Some of them tried to swim to the Union gunboats for safety, but the current was too strong. They were swept away, dozens of them, screaming for help that could not come. I watched them drown, Mary, and I could do nothing. But what troubles me most is what I saw that night, when the battle was over. I was standing watch near the old State House, and I looked down at the river. The moon was full, and in its light I could see them. The drowned men, standing in the water, looking up at me. I know this sounds like madness, but I swear it is true. They were there, Mary, and they did not look peaceful." I put down the letter, my hands trembling. Captain Brennan had seen the same thing I'd seen. The drowned soldiers standing in the water, waiting. But waiting for what? I kept reading and found more accounts. A Confederate soldier's diary mentioned spirits in the river that appeared on the anniversary of the battle. A newspaper article from 1872 described mysterious drownings that occurred every August 5th near the old state capitol. The pattern went back decades. Every year, on August 5th, someone disappeared into the river. Sometimes it was recorded, sometimes it wasn't. But it had been happening for over 100 years. And this year, 1989, I was apparently the designated victim. I left the library with a new sense of urgency. August 5th was 3 days away. I had 3 days to figure out how to break the curse, or whatever it was, before the river claimed me the same way it had claimed my grandfather. That night, I went back to see my grandmother. She was on her porch again, as if she'd been waiting for me. "You went to the water," she said. It wasn't a question. I didn't have a choice, it pulled me in. "But you're here, you got out." "I don't remember how." "Grand-mère, what do I do? The anniversary is in 3 days. I think that's when it's going to try to take me for good." She rocked in her chair for a long moment, staring out at the street. Finally, she spoke. "Your grand-père, before he disappeared, he told me something. He said the river doesn't just take, it protects." "Protects what?" "This city, this land. He said the soldiers who drowned in 1862, they made a sacrifice. They didn't just die, they stayed. They became guardians of the water, keeping something much worse from coming through. Coming through from where? He never said. But he believed that the river needed guardians, that every generation someone had to go into the water and join them, not as a victim, but as a volunteer, to keep the watch. I felt sick. "You're saying I'm supposed to drown myself? To become one of them?" "I'm saying you need to understand what the river is asking for. It's not revenge, Cher. It's not a curse, it's a duty." "That's insane. I'm not drowning myself to become some kind of ghost guardian." "Then the river will take you anyway. But at least if you go willing, you'll understand why." I left my grandmother's house angry and confused. I wasn't going to accept this. There had to be another way. The next day, August 3rd, I went to see Captain DeVille and told him I needed 2 days off. Personal emergency, family issue. He granted it without asking questions, probably assuming I was having some kind of breakdown after the stress of the summer's drownings. He wasn't wrong. I spent August 4th trying to figure out a plan. I couldn't just avoid the river. The pull was too strong. I'd already experienced it once, and I knew that when August 5th came, I wouldn't be able to resist. But maybe I didn't have to drown. Maybe I could go into the water on my own terms, confront whatever was down there, and come back out. It was a desperate plan, but it was all I had. That evening, I gathered some equipment. A diving mask and snorkel I'd used for fishing. An underwater flashlight. A rope, which I planned to tie around my waist and anchor to my unit. If I was going into the Mississippi River, I was going to make damn sure I could get back out. As the sun set on August 4th, I drove to River Mile 229 and parked my unit near the water's edge. The anniversary was less than 6 hours away now, and I could already feel the pull. The river was calling, louder than ever, a sound like rushing water and distant singing mixed together into something that made my teeth ache. I tied one end of the rope around my waist and the other to the bumper of my unit. I put on the diving mask and tested the flashlight. Then I stood at the water's edge and looked down into the Mississippi. They were already there, dozens of them, hundreds. Soldiers in blue and gray, standing in the water, their faces turned up toward me, waiting. I took a deep breath and stepped in. The water was cold, impossibly cold, colder than any Louisiana river should be. I waded in up to my waist, then my chest, the current pulling at me. But I didn't let it carry me away. I held my ground and dove under. The underwater flashlight cut through the murky water, revealing a sight that shouldn't exist. The river bottom wasn't mud and silt. It was a battlefield. I could see cannons and wagon wheels and rifles, all scattered across the riverbed like they'd been there since 1862. And among the wreckage, the soldiers. They were clearer underwater, more solid. Men with waterlogged faces and riverweed in their hair, standing at attention in perfect rows. A battalion of the drowned, eternally on guard. One of them turned to look at me. I recognized him from the old photograph. My grandfather, Emile. He gestured for me to follow him, and against every instinct telling me to surface and get out, I did. He led me deeper, past the rows of soldiers, to a place where the river bottom seemed to drop away into darkness. A massive, underwater chasm, like a wound in the earth itself. And at the edge of that chasm, a stone marker, covered in symbols I didn't recognize but somehow understood. This was what they were guarding, this hole in the world. Whatever was down there, whatever had been sealed beneath the river, the drowned battalion was making sure it stayed sealed. My lungs were starting to burn. I needed air, but Emile pointed to the marker, then to himself, then to me. The meaning was clear. He had taken his turn as a guardian. Now it was mine. I shook my head violently. I wasn't ready. I didn't want this. But Emile just smiled sadly, and I understood. None of them had wanted it either. But they'd done it anyway because someone had to. My vision was starting to blur from lack of oxygen. I kicked toward the surface, following the rope back to my unit. I broke through, gasping, coughing up river water, grateful for the air. I pulled myself out and collapsed on the riverbank, chest heaving. I'd seen what the river wanted. I'd seen what my grandfather had become. And I knew that in less than 6 hours, when August 5th arrived, I'd have to make a choice. Become a guardian of whatever horror lurked in that underwater chasm, or die trying to resist. The river takes. But now I knew why. I sat on the riverbank until dawn, watching the Mississippi flow past, brown and eternal and patient. The sun came up over Baton Rouge, turning the water golden, and for a moment, it looked almost peaceful. Like any other river in any other city. But I knew what lived beneath the surface now. I'd seen the drowned battalion standing eternal watch over that dark chasm. I'd seen my grandfather among them, preserved by the river, neither dead nor alive. I'd seen the thing they were guarding against, something so ancient and terrible that men had been sacrificing themselves for over a century to keep it contained. Today was August 5th, 1989, the 127th anniversary of the Battle of Baton Rouge. And if the pattern held, if my grandmother's warnings were true, today was the day the river would take me. I went home as the city was waking up. People were heading to work, opening their shops, going about their normal routines. They had no idea what lurked beneath the river they drove past every day. No idea that an ancient horror was being held back by the spirits of dead soldiers, or that someone from my family was meant to join them today. I showered and put on clean clothes. I wasn't going to work. I'd already decided that. If this was going to be my last day above water, if I was going to end up like my grandfather, I wanted to spend it understanding exactly what I was dealing with. I wanted to know everything about Pierre Leblanc, the man whose death had apparently set this curse in motion 5 generations ago. I drove to Magnolia Cemetery, where many of the soldiers from the Battle of Baton Rouge were buried. The cemetery was old, established in the 1850s, ancient by American standards. Massive oak trees dripped Spanish moss over the grounds, and weathered tombstones leaned at angles from decades of settling Louisiana earth. The air was thick with humidity even this early in the morning, and the smell of magnolia blossoms mixed with the scent of the nearby river. I walked through the Confederate section first, reading the names and dates carved into limestone and marble. So many young men, barely 20 years old, dead in a war that had torn the country apart. Boys from Mississippi and Alabama and Louisiana itself, who'd died in the streets of Baton Rouge fighting for a cause that most of them probably didn't fully understand. Then I moved to the Union section, where more young men lay, having died just as pointlessly. Ohio boys, Massachusetts boys, Michigan boys, far from home, buried in soil they'd come to conquer. And there, in the back corner of the Union section, half hidden by the shadow of a massive oak, I found him. Pierre Leblanc. Born 1840, New Orleans. Died August 5th, 1862, Baton Rouge. My ancestor. The man whose death had apparently cursed my bloodline for 5 generations. But the tombstone was strange. Unlike the other soldiers who had inscriptions about honor and duty and sacrifice, or Bible verses about eternal rest, Pierre's tombstone had only his name, his dates, and one word in French, gardien. Guardian. Below that, in smaller letters, was a phrase I had to kneel down to read, Il garde la rivière pour nous tous. He guards the river for all of us. So someone had known. Even in 1862, someone had understood what Pierre had done. He hadn't just died in battle. He'd made a conscious choice to become a guardian, to join the drowned battalion, to protect the city from something far worse than enemy soldiers. I sat there in the grass next to his grave for a long time, trying to imagine what it must have been like for him. A young man, probably terrified, watching his friends and comrades drown around him during the battle. Maybe he'd seen the thing in the chasm, felt it stirring, understood that something had to be done, and then making the choice to walk into the water, to drown himself, to become one of the first guardians. Had he been alone in that choice, or had others volunteered too? The drowned battalion had hundreds of soldiers in it. Had they all chosen, or had some been taken by the river against their will? I needed to know more. I needed to understand the full story. I drove to the Louisiana State Library and Archives and asked to see everything they had on Pierre Leblanc. It took the librarian over an hour to pull the materials, but eventually she brought me a box of documents related to the Leblanc family. Inside were letters, military records, and a journal. Pierre's journal, written in careful cursive French. I sat down and began to translate it, my hands trembling slightly as I turned the pages. The early entries were mundane. Pierre had joined the Union Army in 1861, motivated by loyalty to the federal government and opposition to secession. He'd been assigned to the 21st Indiana Infantry and had seen action in several battles before being sent to garrison Baton Rouge in 1862. But the entries from late July and early August 1862 were different. His tone changed from matter-of-fact soldiers' observations to something more urgent, more frightened. July 28, 1862. I have begun to hear something in the river. At night, when I'm on watch, I can hear singing. Not soldiers singing, but something else. Something that sounds like it's coming from deep below the water. The other men don't seem to notice, but I cannot ignore it. August 1st, 1862. The singing is getting louder. I went down to the riverbank tonight and looked into the water. In the reflection of the moon, I saw something moving beneath the surface. Something large. The river is not as it seems. August 3rd, 1862. I spoke to a local woman today, an old Creole woman who works as a laundress for our regiment. I asked her about the river, about whether she'd ever heard strange sounds from it. She crossed herself and told me not to ask questions like that. She said the river has been hungry for a long time, and when blood is spilled here, it wakes up. She said her people have been making offerings to keep it satisfied for generations. But when the Americans came, the offerings stopped. Now it's waking up again, and it's angrier than ever. August 4th, 1862. I cannot sleep. The singing is constant now, even during the day. I see shadows moving in the water. Some of the other men have started to notice too. Private Morrison asked me if I could hear voices coming from the river. I told him it was just his imagination, but I know it isn't. Something is coming. I can feel it. The final entry was dated August 5th, 1862. The day of the battle. The day Pierre died. The Confederates attacked at dawn. The battle has been raging all morning, and we've pushed them back several times, but they keep coming. Many men have fallen into the river during the fighting, weighed down by their equipment, drowning in the current. And I can see it now, the thing below. It's feeding on their deaths, growing stronger with each soul that enters the water. I understand now what must be done. The old Creole woman told me that the river can be satisfied with willing souls, that guardians can hold back the darkness if they choose to serve. The men who drowned today did not choose, and so they are just feeding the thing below. But if I choose, if I go into the water knowing what I'm doing, I can join with the others who understand. We can form a barrier. We can keep it contained. I am afraid. I do not want to die. I do not want to drown. But I have seen what will happen if that thing breaks free. It will consume this entire city. Thousands will die, not just in battle, but in a way that's far worse, taken by something that should not exist in this world. My name is Pierre LeBlanc. I am 22 years old. I am from New Orleans. If anyone finds this journal, please tell my mother that I died for a reason. Tell her I died protecting something worth protecting. I am going to walk into the Mississippi River now. I am going to drown, and I am going to become a guardian. May God have mercy on my soul. That was the last entry. I sat there, with tears streaming down my face, holding the journal of a man who'd faced the same choice I was facing now. Die to protect the city, or let something terrible happen. But there was a difference. Pierre had chosen. He'd walked into that water knowing what he was doing. The 7 victims this summer hadn't known. They'd been called without understanding, and they'd drowned in confusion and fear. And my grandfather Emile? Had he known? Had he understood when he walked into the water in 1955? I needed to find out. I drove to the Baton Rouge Police Department and asked to see Detective Guidry again. "You still chasing those river deaths?" he asked, looking up from his desk with a mixture of concern and exasperation. I need to know everything about my grandfather's disappearance in 1955. I know it's an old case, probably closed, but there has to be a file somewhere. Guidry studied me for a long moment. I must have looked like hell because his expression softened. "Why, Marcus? Why is this so important to you?" "Because I think what happened to him is connected to what's happening now. And I think it's going to happen to me too unless I understand it." That got his attention. He stood up slowly. "What do you mean, happened to you?" "I can't explain. Not in a way that would make sense. But please, just let me see the file." He didn't look convinced, but he went into the archives and came back 20 minutes later with a thin folder labeled LeBlanc, Emile, Missing Person, 1955. I opened it and read through the sparse reports. My grandfather had been reported missing on August 6, 1955, by my grandmother Cecile. He'd gone fishing the night before, August 5th, and never returned. His truck was found parked near River Mile 229. His fishing gear was on the bank, untouched and neatly arranged. No signs of struggle or foul play. But there was one detail that caught my attention. A witness statement from a dock worker named Claude Thibodeau, who'd been working the night shift at the port. "I seen Emile LeBlanc around midnight," the statement read. "He was standing at the water's edge, just staring down into the river. I called out to him, asked if he was okay, if the fish were biting. He turned and looked at me, and his eyes were strange. Like he was seeing something I couldn't see. He said to me, 'The river remembers, Claude. It always remembers, and tonight, it needs me.'" I didn't know what he meant by that. I asked him if he'd been drinking, but he just smiled, sad-like, and said, "Tell Cecile I'm sorry. Tell her I love her, and tell her this was my choice." Then he walked into the water. Just walked right in. Calm as you please, like he was walking into church. I called for help, I swear I did, but by the time anyone got there, he was gone. We searched for days, but we never found the body. My hands were shaking as I put down the report. Tell her this was my choice. Emile had known. Just like Pierre, my grandfather had understood what was required of him, and he'd chosen to become a guardian. But why? What had happened in 1955 that required another guardian? I did the math in my head. 1862 to 1955 was 93 years. Not quite a century, but close enough. Maybe the barrier weakened over time. Maybe every few generations it needed to be reinforced with fresh souls who understood what they were doing. And now it was 1989. 34 years since Emile. Was that enough time for the barrier to weaken again? Was that why the river had been taking people all summer, trying to find someone who would understand? "Marcus," Guidry said, pulling me out of my thoughts, "you look like you're about to pass out. Let me get you some water." I shook my head. "I need to go. Thank you for showing me this. Wait, Marcus, if you're in some kind of trouble, if you're thinking about—" He trailed off, unable to say it. "I'm not suicidal, if that's what you're asking, but I do need to go to the river tonight, and I need to understand what I'm walking into." I left the police station and drove back to my grandmother's house. She was on her porch as always, rocking slowly in her chair. It was mid-afternoon now, the sun beating down mercilessly, but she seemed unbothered by the heat. "You've been reading," she said as I sat down on the steps. It wasn't a question. Pierre's journal, Emile's case file, Grand-Mère, they both knew. They both chose to go into the river. And you will have to choose too. But I don't want to die. I don't want to drown like they did. No one wants to die, Cher. But sometimes we have to do things we don't want to do, for the people we love, for the city we call home. I put my head in my hands. There has to be another way, some way to strengthen the barrier without adding another body to the drowned battalion. My grandmother was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "Pierre went into the river because he had no other choice. The thing below was breaking free and he had to act quickly. Emile went because the barrier was weakening and he understood the duty. But you, Marcus, you have something they didn't have. What's that? Time. Knowledge. You've seen what's down there. You've talked to your grand-père. You know about the drowned battalion and the thing they're guarding. Maybe there's another way to help them. Maybe you don't have to drown to be a guardian." The woman in the water said something like that. She said I could guard with breath in my lungs. Then maybe you should listen to her. The river spirits, they're older than us. They know things we don't. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. I could feel the pull getting stronger now, that inexorable call toward the water. My feet wanted to move. My body wanted to walk to river mile 229 and step into the Mississippi. But my mind rebelled. There had to be another way. Grandmère, the Creole woman Pierre mentioned in his journal. The one who told him about the offerings and the guardians. Do you know anything about that tradition? She nodded slowly. The old ways. Before the Americans came, before even the French came, the people who lived along this river, they understood it. They knew it was alive. They knew it needed to be honored, respected, given gifts. Not human sacrifices usually, but acknowledgement, memory, ritual. What kind of ritual? Songs, stories, prayers, keeping the dead close to our hearts so they don't fade away. When we forget the dead, they lose their power, but when we remember them, when we speak their names and tell their stories, they stay strong. An idea was forming in my mind. A desperate, probably crazy idea, but it was all I had. What if that's what the river needs? Not more bodies, but more memory. What if the barrier is weakening because we've forgotten about the drowned battalion? Because we've forgotten Pierre and all the others who sacrificed themselves? My grandmother's eyes lit up. Yes, Cher, that could work. The old woman in Pierre's journal, she said willing souls could form a barrier. But maybe willing doesn't just mean choosing to die. Maybe it means choosing to remember, choosing to honor. I stood up, suddenly energized despite the exhaustion pulling at me. I need to go to the river, but not to drown, to remember, to honor them all. Then go, Cher, and take this. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small cloth bag tied with string. Gris, protection. Your grand-père gave it to me before he went to the river. I think he'd want you to have it now. I took the bag and kissed her forehead. Thank you, Grandmère. Come back to me, Marcus. Don't you dare let that river take you. I won't, I promise. I drove to River Mile 229 as the sun set completely and darkness fell over Baton Rouge. The old state capitol's Gothic towers were lit up against the night sky, and the river flowed past, eternal and patient and hungry. I parked my unit and walked down to the water's edge. This time, I didn't bring rope or diving equipment. I didn't have a plan to fight the river or escape from it. I just had my grandmother's gris-gris in my pocket and Pierre's journal tucked under my arm. The water was calm tonight, barely any current at all. Unusual for the Mississippi. It was waiting for me. I stood at the edge and looked down. My reflection looked back at me, but it was wrong. In the reflection, I was wearing a Union uniform from 1862. I was Pierre Leblanc, standing at this same spot 127 years ago, making his terrible choice. I know what you want, I said out loud to the river. I know what you need, but I'm not going to drown, not tonight, not like this. The water rippled, though there was no wind. Pierre Leblanc went into this river on August 5th, 1862, I continued, opening his journal. He was 22 years old. He was from New Orleans. He saw what was rising from the depths, and he chose to become a guardian. He chose to protect this city, knowing it would cost him everything. I began to read from the journal, speaking Pierre's words aloud, giving voice to his fear and his courage. As I read, I felt something shift. The pull toward the water lessened slightly. The cold that had been seeping into my bones receded just a little. Émile Leblanc went into this river on August 5th, 1955, I said, when I'd finished reading from Pierre's journal. He was my grandfather. He was 45 years old. He had a wife and a son. He understood the duty. He understood the sacrifice. And he chose to join the Guardians, to help hold the barrier, to protect the city he loved. The water began to glow faintly, and I could see them now. The drowned battalion, rising up closer to the surface, visible in the moonlight. Hundreds of soldiers, standing in perfect formation, their faces turned up toward me, and at the front, Pierre and Emile, side by side. They were listening. "I am Marcus LeBlanc," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I am a Port Authority officer. I am the great-great-grandson of Pierre and the grandson of Emile. I see you. I remember you. I honor your sacrifice. And I am here to tell you that you are not forgotten." The soldiers stood straighter. The water glowed brighter. "You have been guarding this city for 127 years. You have held back the darkness. You have protected thousands of people who will never know your names. But I know your names, and I swear to you, as long as I live, I will make sure others know them too. Your sacrifice will be remembered. Your duty will be honored. You will not fade away." And then she appeared, the Native American woman, standing on the surface of the water like it was solid ground. She smiled at me. "You understand now," she said. "The guardians don't just need bodies in the water. They need recognition, remembrance. The living must acknowledge the dead, or the dead lose their power. So I don't have to drown? You have to choose. You can join them, add your strength directly to the barrier, or you can stay above and use your voice to keep their memory alive. Both are forms of guardianship. Both are necessary. I choose to stay alive. I choose to be their voice." She nodded. "Then you must commit to that choice. You must make sure they are never forgotten. Every year, on the anniversary of the battle, you must come here. You must speak their names, tell their stories, honor their sacrifice. You must bring others to do the same. Community remembrance has power. Collective memory strengthens the barrier. I will, I swear it. Then you are the guardian the river needs. Not drowned, but witnessing. Not silent, but speaking. You will carry their stories forward, and in doing so, you will keep them strong." She began to fade back into the water, but before she disappeared completely, she spoke one more time. "The barrier will hold, Marcus LeBlanc, but only as long as you keep your promise." And then she was gone. The glow faded from the water. The drowned battalion sank back down to the depths. But I could still feel them there, standing watch, protecting the city. I looked down at my feet. I was standing ankle-deep in the river. I'd been pulled in without even realizing it. But now, the pull was gone. The call had stopped. I stepped back onto the dry land and took a deep breath. I was alive. I was staying alive. But I had work to do. I had a promise to keep. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I'd just made a promise to the dead, to an entire battalion of drowned soldiers who were holding back some ancient cosmic horror beneath the Mississippi River, and I had no idea how I was going to keep that promise. I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, drinking coffee and trying to figure out where to even begin. I wasn't a historian, I wasn't a priest or a spiritual leader. I was just a Port Authority officer who could see ghosts and feel the pulse of something terrible living in the depths of the river. But I'd made a promise. And if my family's history had taught me anything, it was that promises to the river were binding. As the sun came up over Baton Rouge, I made a decision. I would start small. I would start with the truth. I called in sick to work again, something that was becoming a pattern. Captain DeVille was getting concerned. I could hear it in his voice, but he granted me the time off. Then I drove to the Louisiana State Library and asked to see Dr. Sarah Mills, the anthropology professor from LSU who'd helped me with my earlier research. She was surprised to see me. "Officer LeBlanc, I wasn't expecting you. Is this about the Battle of Baton Rouge research?" "In a way. Dr. Sarah Mills, I need your help with something. Something that's going to sound crazy, but I promise you it's important. She invited me into her office, a cluttered space filled with books and artifacts and maps of Louisiana's indigenous territories. I sat down across from her desk and tried to figure out how to explain without sounding completely insane. "What do you know about river guardian traditions?" I asked. "Among which peoples?" The Chitimaca had water spirits they honored. The Homa had rituals for the Mississippi. The Choctaw had their own traditions before they were displaced. Why? Because I think those traditions were about something real, something that still exists. Dr. Mills leaned forward, intrigued. "Go on." I took a deep breath and told her everything. Not the supernatural parts, not yet, but I told her about the pattern of drownings, about my family's connection to the river, about Pierre's journal and Emile's choice. I told her about the Battle of Baton Rouge and the soldiers who'd drowned that day. "There are hundreds of men whose bodies were never recovered from the river," I said. "They drowned during the battle, weighed down by their equipment, swept away by the current. No one ever really mourned them properly. No one ever honored their specific sacrifice. They're just listed as drowned in the records, if they're mentioned at all." "That's true of many Civil War casualties, unfortunately," Dr. Mills said. "The chaos of war meant a lot of soldiers were never properly identified or buried. But what if they should be honored? What if forgetting them has consequences?" She was quiet for a moment, thinking. "You're talking about the indigenous concept of ancestral memory, the idea that the dead need to be remembered, need to have their names spoken, or they can't rest properly." "Yes, exactly that. And you think this is connected to the drownings this summer?" I hesitated. This was the part where she'd either understand or think I'd lost my mind. "I think the river remembers them, even if we don't, and I think it's been trying to tell us that for a long time." Dr. Mills sat back in her chair, studying me carefully. "Officer LeBlanc, I've studied indigenous traditions for 20 years, and one thing I've learned is that there's often truth in what mainstream society dismisses as superstition. The people who lived here before us, they understood this land in ways we've forgotten. If you're saying the river has its own kind of consciousness, its own needs and demands, I'm willing to entertain that idea." "So, you'll help me?" "Help you do what, exactly?" "Create a memorial, a ceremony, something annual, on August 5th, where we remember the soldiers who drowned in the Battle of Baton Rouge, where we speak their names, tell their stories, honor their sacrifice, not just as victims of war, but as protectors, as guardians of the city." She smiled slowly. "A river remembrance ceremony. I think that's a beautiful idea, and I think I know exactly how to make it happen." Over the next few weeks, Dr. Mills and I worked together almost every day. She brought in colleagues from the university's history and anthropology departments. We researched every soldier who'd died in the Battle of Baton Rouge, especially those who'd drowned. We found names, ages, hometowns, family connections. We turned them from statistics into people. We discovered that most of the Union soldiers who drowned were from Indiana and Michigan regiments. Young men, far from home, who'd died in a muddy southern river fighting a war that probably made no sense to them. We found letters from their families, desperate requests for information about their sons and brothers and husbands who'd never come home. We also found Confederate soldiers, though fewer of them were documented. Many had been locals, Louisiana boys who'd drowned in their own river while trying to recapture their own city. Dr. Mills helped me understand something important. Honoring the dead wasn't about taking sides in the Civil War. It wasn't about glorifying the Confederacy or celebrating the Union victory. It was about recognizing that all these young men had died terrible deaths, and none of them deserved to be forgotten. "We're not building a monument to war," she explained as we worked. "We're building a monument to memory, to the idea that every life matters, every death deserves acknowledgement, and forgetting is its own kind of violence." I thought about Pierre and Émile when she said that. They'd died so that others wouldn't. They'd become guardians so that the living could forget about the thing in the depths. But in forgetting the danger, we'd also forgotten the guardians, and that forgetting had weakened them. Not anymore. In mid-September, we presented our proposal to the Baton Rouge City Council. Dr. Mills did most of the talking, thank God, because I still didn't fully trust myself to explain without mentioning the supernatural aspects. She pitched it as a historical commemoration, a way to honor a largely forgotten aspect of the city's Civil War heritage. The Battle of Baton Rouge was a significant engagement, she told the council members. It determined Union control of this strategic port for the remainder of the war. But in focusing on the military significance, we've overlooked the human cost, specifically the soldiers who drowned in the Mississippi River during the battle. These men died terrible deaths, and their bodies were never recovered. They deserve to be remembered. The council approved the proposal. They granted us permission to use the riverfront park near the old state capitol. They even allocated a small budget for a memorial plaque to be installed at River Mile 229. The plaque would read, "In memory of the soldiers, Union and Confederate, who lost their lives in the waters of the Mississippi River during the Battle of Baton Rouge, August 5, 1862. May they never be forgotten." We set the date for the first River Remembrance Ceremony, August 5, 1990, 1 year after I'd almost drowned, 1 year after the 7 victims had walked into the water. We had 10 months to prepare. Dr. Mills organized the academic side, coordinating with local historians and genealogy societies to compile a complete list of names. I worked on outreach, contacting descendants of the soldiers who'd fought in the battle, reaching out to Civil War reenactment groups, and connecting with churches and community organizations. But I also did something else, something I told no one about. Every night after my shift at the Port Authority, I would drive to River Mile 229 and spend an hour at the water's edge. I would think about the drowned battalion. I would speak Pierre's name and Émile's name. I would tell them what we were planning, how we were going to make sure they were remembered. And slowly, I could feel the difference. The barrier felt stronger. The presence of the thing in the chasm felt more distant. The pull toward the water, which had haunted me since June, gradually faded until it was just a whisper instead of a scream. The guardians were getting stronger. Memory was feeding them, just like the native woman had said it would. My grandmother noticed the change in me. When I visited her in October, she took one look at me and smiled. "You've found your way, Cher." "I think so. We're having a ceremony next August to honor them all. Your grand-père would be proud. I just hope it's enough. I hope it keeps the barrier strong." "It will. You've given them what they needed most. Recognition. You've told the world they matter." We sat on her porch in comfortable silence, drinking coffee and watching the neighborhood go about its evening routines. Normal life, ordinary moments, all of it protected by the sacrifice of men whose names had been forgotten. Not anymore. In January, Dr. Mills introduced me to a local musician named Antoine Broussard, a Creole folk artist who specialized in traditional Louisiana songs. We commissioned him to write a song for the ceremony, something that would honor the drowned soldiers while drawing on the river traditions that had existed long before the Civil War. Antoine spent weeks on it, researching old Creole ballads and indigenous river songs. In March, he performed it for us for the first time. It was in French and English, mixing languages the way Louisiana itself mixed cultures. It was mournful and beautiful and exactly right. The chorus went, La rivière se souvient, the river remembers. Les gardiens veillent, the guardians watch. Nous n'oublions jamais, we never forget. Merci, merci pour votre sacrifice. When Antoine finished singing, I had tears in my eyes. Dr. Mills was crying too. This is perfect, she said. This is exactly what we need. As spring turned to summer and August approached, word about the ceremony spread. We were contacted by journalists interested in the story. A few history professors from other universities asked if they could attend, and most importantly, we heard from families. Descendants of soldiers who'd fought in the Battle of Baton Rouge reached out, thanking us for finally acknowledging what had happened to their ancestors. We heard from a woman in Indiana whose great-great-grandfather had been listed as drowned in the battle records. We heard from a man in Texas whose Confederate ancestor had died trying to swim across the river under fire. Each family we connected with added another name to our list. By the time August arrived, we had identified 247 soldiers who had drowned in the Mississippi River on August 5, 1862, or in the days immediately following the battle. 247 names, 247 stories, 247 lives that had been forgotten for 128 years. We were going to remember them all. The night before the ceremony, I went to see my grandmother one last time. She was weaker now, her health declining with age, but her spirit was as strong as ever. Tomorrow's the day, grand-mère. I know, Cher. I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it. Do you think they know? Pierre and Émile and all the others? Do you think they can feel what we're doing? She took my hand. They know. The dead always know when the living remember them. And they're grateful. The morning of August 5th, 1990, dawned hot and humid. Typical Louisiana summer weather. By 9 a.m., people were already gathering at the riverfront park. We'd set up chairs, a small stage for speakers, and a table where people could place flowers and photos. By the time the ceremony started at 11, over 200 people had shown up. Historians, descendants, Civil War enthusiasts, city officials, and regular Baton Rouge residents who'd heard about the event and wanted to pay their respects. Dr. Mills opened the ceremony with a brief history of the Battle of Baton Rouge and an explanation of why we were gathering. Then Antoine Broussard sang his river song, his voice carrying across the water. I was next. I walked to the microphone with Pierre's journal in my hands, my heart pounding. I'd prepared remarks, but now that I was standing there, looking out at all these people and knowing the drowned battalion was watching from beneath the water, I abandoned my script. My name is Marcus Leblanc, I said. My great-great-grandfather, Pierre Leblanc, drowned in this river on August 5th, 1862. He was 22 years old. He was scared. He didn't want to die. But he did his duty anyway. I opened the journal and read Pierre's final entry, the one where he explained why he was choosing to walk into the water. When I finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. My grandfather, Émile Leblanc, drowned in this river on August 5, 1955. He was 45 years old. He had a wife and a son. He understood something that most people don't understand, that sacrifice doesn't end with one generation, that duty passes down through families, through communities, through time. I closed the journal. These men, and the hundreds of others who died in this river, they deserve to be remembered, not just as casualties of war, but as human beings, as sons and brothers and fathers and friends, as people who mattered. I gestured toward the river. The Mississippi River has been part of Baton Rouge's story for thousands of years. It's given us life and trade and beauty, but it's also taken from us. It's taken soldiers and fishermen and ordinary people just walking along its banks. And the least we can do, the very least, is remember their names. We spent the next hour reading names. All 247 soldiers who'd drowned in the battle. Their names, their ages, their home states. With each name, someone from the crowd would place a flower in the river. White roses, floating downstream, carried by the current. As I watched the flowers drift away, I felt it. The barrier strengthening, the drowned battalion standing taller. The thing in the chasm retreating, pushed back by the weight of collective remembrance. It was working. After the names were read, we unveiled the memorial plaque. It would stay at this spot forever, a permanent reminder of what had happened here. The ceremony ended with a moment of silence. 200 people standing at the water's edge, honoring the dead. And in that silence I heard them, the drowned battalion, singing, that low, mournful song I'd heard in the water. But this time it didn't sound sad. It sounded grateful. After the ceremony, people lingered, talking and sharing stories. My grandmother came up to me, moving slowly with her cane, and hugged me tight. "You did it, Cher. You kept your promise. This is just the beginning. We'll do this every year. We'll never let them be forgotten again. I know you will. Your grand-père would be so proud." That night, after everyone had gone home and the riverfront was quiet again, I went back to the water one last time. I stood at the edge and looked down. They were there, the entire battalion, standing in perfect formation. Pierre in his Union uniform, Emile in his work clothes, hundreds of others behind them, and at the very front, the Native American woman who had guided me. "You kept your promise," she said. "The barrier is stronger now than it's been in decades. You've given the Guardians what they needed. Will it last? Will one ceremony a year be enough?" As long as the ceremony continues, as long as people come to remember, yes, community memory has power. The more people who participate, the stronger the Guardians become. What about the thing below? Will it ever give up? Will it ever stop trying to break free? No, it's ancient and patient and hungry. It will always be there, always pushing against the barrier. But now the barrier will hold. Because you've made sure the Guardians are not alone. You've given them an army of the living to support them. And me, what's my role now? You are the keeper of the story, the bridge between the drowned and the living. Every year you must return here. You must lead the ceremony. You must make sure the names are spoken and the sacrifice is honored. That is your duty, Marcus Leblanc. Not to drown, but to remember. Not to die, but to witness. I can do that. I will do that. She smiled and began to fade back into the water. Then go, Guardian. Live your life. Love your family. Do your work, but never forget what lies beneath. And then she was gone. The river, remembrance ceremony became an annual tradition. Each year it grew bigger. More people came. More flowers were placed in the water. More names were read. I led the ceremony for the next 25 years, until I was too old and tired to manage it anymore. Then I passed the duty to Dr. Mills, who passed it to one of her graduate students, who passed it to someone else. The tradition continued, growing and evolving, but always maintaining its core purpose: remember the dead, honor the sacrifice, keep the Guardians strong. In 1998, the city officially recognized the event and began providing support. They built a permanent memorial garden at River Mile 229, with benches and a fountain and a larger plaque listing all the names. In 2005, after Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans and southern Louisiana, the ceremony took on new meaning. People came not just to remember the Civil War dead, but all those lost to the waters of Louisiana. The Mississippi, the Gulf, the lakes and bayous that had claimed so many lives. The ceremony became a healing ritual for a traumatized community. I retired from the Port Authority in 2010, after 33 years of service. I'd spent more than half my life watching over River Mile 229, feeling the pulse of the river, keeping my promise to the drowned battalion. But I never stopped going to the ceremony. Every August 5th, no matter what else was happening in my life, I was there at the riverfront, placing flowers in the water and speaking the names of the dead. My grandmother passed away in 1995, at the age of 90. Her funeral was held in the old Creole neighborhood where she'd lived her whole life. As we carried her casket to the cemetery, we passed by the river, and I swear I saw Emile standing in the shallows, watching. She was with him now, in whatever form the dead take when they're remembered and honored. In 2012, something unexpected happened. A young woman approached me after the ceremony. She introduced herself as Celeste LeBlanc, my cousin's daughter. She just graduated from college and was starting work with the Port Authority. "I need to talk to you, Cousin Marcus," she said. "About the river, about our family. I've been feeling something, hearing something, and I don't know what it means." I looked at her carefully. She had the LeBlanc eyes, the same eyes Pierre had in his old photographs. And I could see it in her expression. She could feel the river, too. "Let's take a walk," I said. We walked along the riverfront, and I told her everything. The drowned battalion, the entity in the chasm, Pierre and Emile and their sacrifices, the promise I'd made in 1989 to be a living guardian. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "So that's why I hear the singing," she finally said. "That's why I can see shadows in the water. Yes. You have the gift, or the curse, depending on how you look at it. You're sensitive to the river, like I am, like Emile was. What does that mean for me? It means you have a choice. You can ignore it, try to block it out, live a normal life. Or you can accept the duty. Watch over the river. Keep the ceremony going after I'm gone. Make sure the guardians are never forgotten. That's not really a choice, is it? If I ignore it, if I let them be forgotten, then the barrier weakens. Then that thing below breaks free. Then people die. Yes." She looked out at the river, at the brown water flowing past, eternal and patient. "Then I guess I know what I have to do. You don't have to decide right now. Take some time. Think about it. Talk to your family. I don't need to think about it. If this is what our family does, if this is who we are, then I'm in. Someone has to remember. Someone has to watch. If it's me, then okay, I'll do it." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. For 23 years, I'd wondered what would happen when I died. Who would keep the promise? Who would maintain the ceremony and watch over the river? Now I knew. The duty would continue. The guardians would not be forgotten. I'm 87 years old now, as I tell this story. The River Remembrance Ceremony is in its 35th year and shows no signs of stopping. Thousands of people have participated over the decades. The drowned battalion has been remembered and honored by generations of Baton Rouge residents. And the barrier holds. Celeste took over as the primary keeper of the ceremony 10 years ago, when I became too frail to manage it. She's done a better job than I ever did, bringing in new elements, connecting with younger people, making sure the tradition evolves while staying true to its purpose. Last year, she told me she's been teaching her daughter about the river, about the responsibility, about the duty that passes down through our family line. The circle continues. The guardians remain strong. I still go down to River Mile 229 sometimes when my old bones can manage the walk. I stand at the water's edge and look down into the Mississippi, and in the reflection, I see them. Pierre, forever young in his Union uniform. Emile, still watching over the city. The hundreds of others who've joined them over the years. They see me too, the living guardian who kept his promise, the one who chose to remember instead of drown, and they nod to me, and I nod back. An understanding between worlds, a debt acknowledged and honored. The river takes, but because we remember, because we honor, because we refuse to forget, it doesn't take everything. It lets some of us stay, and we use that gift to tell the stories of those who went into the water and never came back out. That's my duty. That's my purpose. That's why I'm still here, 35 years after the river called me, and I said no. I'm the witness, the keeper of stories, the guardian who lives and breathes and speaks. And as long as I draw breath, as long as Celeste continues after me, as long as someone stands at the water's edge every August 5th and reads the names of the dead, the barrier will hold. The drowned battalion will stand strong, and Baton Rouge will endure. The river takes. But it also gives us purpose, it gives us duty, it gives us a reason to remember that sacrifice matters, that every life has value, and that forgetting is the real death. The river remembers, and so do we, always.